Good morning. Welcome to the Decatur Book Festival. This is our Romantasy section. If you're looking for the history, that is across the hall. So just want to make sure you're in the right. I figured there'd be a few. They're vastly different genres. Don't want you to get mixed up. My name is Amy Perry, and I'm the stage captain today here at the hotel. I have a few brief announcements before the program begins. Our authors will sign books after the presentation. Volunteers will direct you to the signing line after the talk ends. There is no Q&A after the presentation. And today our books are available by our bookseller, Brave and Kind. They will be located outside for book purchases. The Decatur Book Festival is a nonprofit organization. It depends on sponsors and donations to bring great authors to Decatur each year. Please consider a tax-deductible donation to support the festival by going to the festival website, decaturbookfestival.com. Lastly, please take a moment to ensure all devices' ringtones are turned off. And now let me introduce our authors today. Moderating the talk is Kim Conrey. She was named the Georgia Romance Author of the Year for 2023. She's the author of the Wayward Saviors and Heiress Ascending series. She serves as VP of Operations for the Atlanta Writers Club. In addition, she collaborates on a podcast with the Wild Women Who Write. Our author, Rebecca Kenney, writes contemporary fantasy, paranormal romance, and spicy fantasy romance. She lives in upstate South Carolina with her handsome, blue-eyed husband and two smart, energetic kids. Her new book is Beautiful Villain. Our next author, Sara Raasch, is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books for young adults. In her debut adult novel, Raasch offers readers all the joy, irreverent wit, and crackling sexiness of your favorite sweet as a candy cane holiday romp. The book is Nightmare Before Christmas. K.A. Linde is the New York Times USA Today #1 Sunday Times bestselling author of The Wren in the Holly Library. She is prolific in both romance and fantasy and loves the blend of the two. Please welcome our authors.
I'm really happy to be here talking with these wonderful authors. And as a quick little story, when I first found out that I got to moderate the panel, I was talking with an aspiring writer and friend of mine named Michaela. And when I was telling her about the authors that were going to be on the panel, she said, "No way." And first thing she did was send me a picture that she had taken with Rebecca Kenney at a Polycon. And she was so excited. And it was just the sweetest thing because she was telling me about, how sweet the authors there were and how sweet Rebecca was to her. And I thought, isn't that just what it's all about? When good stories, good writing, and just really darn kind authors show this kindness to their fans. And she was telling me about, the writing advice she was given because she would ask each of the writers at a Polycon, well, do you have any writing advice for me? And what would you tell me as a writer, that's writing fantasy? And it was just really sweet. And I thought that was the coolest thing about it, is that when I said I'm moderating a panel with these authors, the first reaction was the kindness. And to me, that's what it's all about, the kindness and the joy. And, when she sent me that little picture of her and Rebecca, I thought, man, that's it. That's what it's about, right? just the kindness there with these authors and the other authors that she had met there at a Polycon. I was like, yeah, right on. And so what I thought with the first question we could start with is, even though I would imagine most people here, you're here because you love Romantasy and you're familiar with the genre, but I thought there may be some people here who've come along with a friend that may not quite understand it or be able to define it. And so I was thinking, let's define it first and say what maybe separates it from, say, a subgenre that people might be familiar with, like, say, paranormal romance or something like that. So who would like to talk a little bit about that?
I feel like all of us could talk a lot about that. I actually was just explaining this to some other people because they were like, what is romantasy versus romantic fantasy or high fantasy or just regular fantasy? Because all of those things end up having romance in it. There's romance in Game of Thrones, but we wouldn't call that romantasy. And so a lot of times I usually say that romantic fantasy is fantasy that has a romance subplot, even if it's a main subplot. But romantasy is when the romance is the main plot and the fantasy is in a fantasy world. You can still have a fantasy plot, but the plot doesn't work without also having the love story in it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for keeping it a little bit fluid, because I feel like we can include, my book, Beautiful Villain, is a Gatsby retelling, and it's contemporary, but it has a lot of mythological and magical elements. And so sometimes it's classified as a romantasy. But I also write a lot of indie books, and almost all of those are romantasy. But yeah, the main thing is it's fantasy, and the world building may be heavier or lighter, but you need that romance plot in there. It's an important part of the story. It's not just some little added in thing. It's a vital part of those characters, their development and how they change, how they're relating to that world.
I like that I got to go last because I could just be like, what they said. That was really smart. I think so. Kissmas was my first venture into both adults and romantasy, because before that I was writing purely high fantasy. So getting to transition from a pure high fantasy to romantasy, again, yeah, romance is a huge part of it. The thing that kept me going with it, though, was having the element of escapism, which is also from high fantasy, but getting to have the escapism angled more towards romance, which just sounds like nothing, but people know what I'm talking about. We're all here for romantasy. But having that escapism element was really important for it to congeal in what it was, for it to be more of a romantasy and not just high fantasy or a romance.
I also think, just to add on to that, is that a lot of the genres cross. So my book, The Red and the Holly Library, is also an urban fantasy because it's set in New York City and there's a heist and there's all of these other elements you would normally consider that happen in an urban fantasy. But the central plot is that she steals from the wrong monster and he's like, you work for me now, and they fall in love also, so you work for me now.
It's the tone of it. Right?
Well, there you go. So yeah, I think that helps us define it a little bit more. And this is one that as an author, I really don't like getting asked because I feel like I'm supposed to come up with an elaborate, so interesting answer. I know, right? This is scary. But I find that the audience nearly always asks it. So I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask it. And that is, what is your writing process like?
I'm just gonna coast this whole plan. Dang it. My writing process, I am the world's biggest planner. I spreadsheets on outlines to the point where it becomes detrimental to the actual writing process, because I would rather just keep planning. If I keep planning, eventually the draft will be perfect and I won't have to edit the draft. That's my this is my completely ridiculous goal to one day. It never is going to happen. But it's first in the back of my head, that is one day I will write the perfect first draft. But so I plan spreadsheets on everything, and Google Docs and excel and like just really chaotic notes, but they make sense.
I don't plan anything.
This is a really good order to go in.
I am what's called a pantser, fly by the seat of your pants type writer, otherwise known as a discovery writer. I prefer that term. So for me, it's just like I have an idea. Usually I have a character dynamic. I have like kind of the vibes that I want. Sometimes I have certain aspects of the world, and then I just like jump in and go. And it just kind of, usually it just kind of flows out. I don't know who has seen the movie Tick, Tick, Boom, but where he goes to the bottom of the pool and he like has been struggling to write this song through the whole movie, and he's swimming in the pool and he's swimming, and then all of a sudden it hits and he goes to the bottom of the pool and he brushes away the sand, and there's the song and it's already written. And sometimes it feels that way for me. It's like the book is there and I'm just like uncovering it. And sometimes it's harder than that. Sometimes it's just like, why won't this paragraph do what it's supposed to do, you know? But a lot of the times for me, it is kind of almost like I'll come out of it like, I don't know if it's like an ADHD hyperfixation thing too, but like I go into it for like 3 hours and then I come out of it. I'm like, I don't even remember writing this. Like what just happened?
This is the perfect order to go in because I am what they call a plantser, because I do both of these things. I start out and I do all of the spreadsheets and I do all of the outlining, and then I sit down to write and I throw it all out the window and I just write whatever happens, and then I get mad about it, and then I go back and I re-outline, and then I sit down to write, and the characters are like, that's not what happens. Good luck though. And then I get mad again and I go back to the drawing board and I'm like, I really want this one thing to happen. And they're like, but it doesn't happen like that. So it's a little bit of both. Mostly I take both of the sides of the torture that they go through and I get both of them.
You guys just gave me so much anxiety.
It gives
You
me
have to
so
have
much
a plan.
anxiety.
How do you not have a plan?
I know. The plan just, it doesn't, I can't follow the plan. I even try.
So Romantasy doesn't shy away from serious topics. The characters are often in their situations due to their standing in society, which is hard to escape, like we see in A Wren in the Holly Library, where a thief is doing the best she can to survive the life that was thrust upon her. Or in A Beautiful Villain, we see our heroine in a situation of finding herself in a toxic relationship that she only sees clearly in hindsight. Though A Nightmare Before Christmas contains a lot of humor, it also contains truth. We see the very relatable situation of a hero trying to live up to expectations of family and society to the point that his truth has almost become buried entirely. As a reader, I wonder, do these storylines and character arcs come from looking at society and thinking, I'd like to address this? Or just being human and having experienced these things, at least on some level? And in other words, do you work from the outside in or from the inside out, just writing what you feel?
I guess I'll go first. I think it's some of both. For me, in Beautiful Villain, it's a retelling of The Great Gatsby. And in the original, Daisy is, she's married to Tom. In my version, I didn't want her actually married with a kid, you know. So she has just come out of this relationship with Tom, and looking back on it is starting to realize how fortunate she is to have escaped. And this is not based on my personal experience, but on, you know, the experiences of people that I know. And so I did want to put some of that in there, like to encourage, you know, women. You can't always see it when you're in it, you know? And, that was an important theme to me, like abusive, toxic relationships and, you know, what, now Gatsby himself is a bit stalkerish, you know, we all know this from the original.
We're here for it.
But he's a sweet stalker. He's a nice, you know.
We like the red flags in fiction.
It's like there's a difference between morally gray and like truly toxic, you know. And anyway,
The line is fiction.
But as far as like coming from personal experience, I do in a lot of my books, especially in some of my indie books, I have the Sleeping Beauty retelling. It's like a fantasy romance, and there's like two different types of religions based on magic that they kind of clash, and that's coming out of my own religious trauma. I grew up in a very, very strict, almost cultish environment, and had to just claw my way out of all of that. And so sometimes you'll see bits of that come through my books, and there's a lot about grief, things like that. So I think we work from both the inside and the outside, I think.
I think a lot of it comes down to character. When you're building your characters and when you're developing your characters, whether or not you pre-plan it or post-plan it and they just discover it, I feel like a lot of the times it's that every human is flawed. And so if you're not bringing something real to the table for them, they're not going to feel like a fully developed person. So in the Ren and the Holly Library, she has all these like emotional intimacy issues because of past abandonment. And also there was like a war that happened. So she also has lots of very negative feelings about wealth and people who had it and hoarded it and didn't help other people, which does come from personal experience. As we can see a lot of times that like, consumerism is all well and good until like only the top 0.1% has any money and everyone else is struggling to get groceries. So there's some of that, looking at it in the same way that like Hunger Games would, whereas like it always sticks out to me in Hunger Games is when they were like eating so much food, then they took something so they could throw up. It's that same sort of like looking at people who had those sorts of things and how you would deal with that when you came from nothing and came from a war and managed to survive, and the scars that gives you really have to think past what the person was versus what happened to them versus how a real person would actually deal with those sort of scars. And sometimes what's interesting is that in my book, there's like this found family, and her and one of her best friends went through very similar situations, and he is like heart on his sleeve, always out there. He wants to give his love to everybody, and she is like completely closed off, but they went through the same thing. So a lot of times, no matter what you go through, people are always going to react to it in a different way, and it depends on the character.
Yeah, the characters for sure are huge. In Christmas, when the main character, Cole, when he started to congeal more and more, and I knew that he was going to be like 22, right on the cusp of graduating from college and set to take over Christmas because he's the heir of Christmas. It kind of played into like, the 1% as well, because Christmas as a whole is very, capitalized. And like you go into like right now, there's Christmas stuff in stores. You can buy Christmas trees in October. It's insane. So yeah, oh my God, it's ridiculous. So I know I wanted to kind of play on that idea of like Christmas being, it can be this really good thing, but it can also be this very commercialized, like heavy, takes over all the other holidays this time of year. Very Grinch-esque. So I wanted to kind of tie that into where Cole is at in his own growth personal journey, where he's getting ready to graduate from college, and he's going to be one day taking over this giant behemoth of a thing that is kind of toxic. And like, how do you process that? How do you deal with that? I feel like a lot of the younger generations kind of feel like that too, where like, yes, you're on the cusp of coming into adulthood, but all we have for you is crap. Like, what are you going to do about it? So like, do you fight it? Do you accept it? Do you just become part of the system? Like, how do you deal with that? And it's really hard to find your place in that and to find out who you are in the midst of all this other stuff. So it was fun to get to play around with that and to kind of work out my own issues with our world through Cole and Christmas.
I love it. And that might be a good segue into this question. Was there a moment in one of your books where a character surprised you as you were writing them? Now, probably not for Sarah, because she's got them planned out to the very moment.
There are no surprises.
Stay in line. But yeah, sometimes you're writing and you get so into it and they take their own little turn there. Does that ever happen for you guys?
Yes. It happens all the time. Actually, and sometimes it happens in the other direction too. Like there's sometimes I'm going and I'm like certain of the path, and then they go off path. And sometimes I'll be so certain of what the path is that my friend here is, I keep telling her that I wanted to include this one element in this last book that I wrote. And like literally every morning I'd be like, I think I figured out the way to do it. And they were like, absolutely not. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Usually my problem arises when I try to create a villain, like an actual villain that you're not supposed to like or think is hot.
And then you want him.
And then they just end up being hot. So it happens
normal.
all the time.
We're going to blame everything on Beauty and the Beast.
I'm really tired of it, but at the same time, I really love it. So yeah. Yeah, this happened in my, I have this Dragon Shifter series I just started, and it's happened in the second book. I'm like, no, he's really bad. Like, he's really, really, really bad. And he's not the love interest, but I'm like, I can redeem him in a future book.
Are you sure?
I can save him.
He's not the princess's love interest.
I can fix him. No, really, I can.
But I'm thinking now, I have this like plot in my head of some other girl that can redeem him later on in the series. And like,
It's all about meeting your match.
right.
It definitely in romance, there's some like meeting your match stuff here.
Like, I do have surprising elements that come out of it. I know it's amazing. I work really hard not to.
But you hate
surprised.
it?
I hate it. It's terrible. I didn't plan for this. The surprising elements for me are usually what aspects of the book become important to the main character. Like in Christmas, Cole, like he didn't really come together until I figured out that he had a brother. And then that element of the story, like everything else just fell into place and took off. For some reason, like that was the one thing that he was waiting on. Like I cannot tell you the story until I have my brother. And that became like a huge plot arc, is that him and his brother and their relationship and how the dynamic that they both share, being Christmas princes and having to inherit this big Christmas princess. Yeah. I know. Like the one thing is not like the other with like, oh, there's books up here. So that's never here's my happy little Christmas book.
We love it though. We need both.
What is your research process? Or do you have one, or do you just do research when you feel like it's needed?
Should Sarah
This
start?
one's not for me. I can't answer this.
Of course, I picked that moment to take a drink of water and had to set something down. Oh my God, I love research sometimes.
I love research too.
Yeah, it can be fun. It's just like homework that you get to pick.
Homework you get to
doesn't sound
pick.
exciting. You get to pick, yeah, right. I actually have on my bookshelf a lot of books on the history of Christmas, because I really wanted to, when I was doing this and knew that I wanted to get into the holiday, I wanted to, it's world building. It is set in our world, so it is Christmas, but it's also, there's so much to Christmas that like, I had to pick and choose which aspects of it were going to go into developing my version of Christmas. So I got a lot of the books about the history of Christmas and like where it developed from and the different aspects that all come together to make it. And that actually came into play in the book as well, that like there's so many different threads that actually can make a holiday. Like there really isn't just one type of one thing that this is the holiday. Like there's so many elements to it.
Stealing from the pagans.
The pagans. Woo pagans. Yeah, woo pagans. I'm gonna end on that. Woo pagans. Okay.
I am an academic, and my husband's an academic, so I am a big nerd. And so I love the research part a little too much, into the fact that I usually have to figure out how I can pull back, because it's not always relevant, except that it feels like it at the time in my head. And so like for the Run in the Holly Library, I actually came up with the idea when I was in Ireland, because I was there with my mom. We have Irish ancestry, so we were like touring. We went to Christchurch Cathedral, and I heard a story about how Lawrence O'Toole's heart was encased in metal, and someone had stolen it from the church. And it was this priceless artifact, and they had no idea where it went, and no one saw that. And then like a few years later, it just showed up. Someone had like thrown it back on the church grounds, and they were like, we don't know how it came back. We don't know what happened to it. We never found it again. And I was like, okay, this is the basis for my story. I want someone who can steal something like this. So I went to an Irish bookstore and just bought I brought home like an extra suitcase of Irish mythology books, and then like read them all. But it's set in New York. It's not set in Ireland. So I had already been to New York a bunch, but I had already written a draft. And then me and my husband went to New York for a week, and we walked everywhere and took the subway every place that they went in the book. So I could really like take pictures and videos to like immerse myself. So to the point that my editor actually didn't know I wasn't from New York. I was like, I'm from Atlanta, actually. I was like, I'm not from New York. So there's a lot of that. And then I actually did research into New York's history because some of the stuff that happens, there's like a monster underground, and I wanted it to be a real underground. And so there's a thing called Third Floor, which is beneath Grand Central Station, which is just a giant warehouse that connects to Amtrak, but it's a secret passageway for the presidents to escape the city. And so that's in the book. And so I've done a whole bunch of research on those sorts of things that tie it into real life while it's also about monsters in New York City.
I do occasionally research things. Okay. So usually if I'm doing a retelling, I will research the original. Like for the Gatsby book, I reread, the original novel. I watched the movies and whatever. And so in that series, I am doing a little bit of fun research right now. In that series, it's the first book is a Gatsby retelling. Second book is Charming Devil, which is the retelling of the Picture of Dorian Gray with mythology, Celtic mythology.
Is it gay?
He is pansexual. He is pansexual.
Oh, awesome.
She's bi, so yes, it is queer.
Good.
And then the third one is Wuthering Heights, Southern Gothic Wuthering Heights with necromancers and banshees in it.
You do like them
But
bad.
the fourth one, which I'm writing now, is the Phantom of the Opera set in Nashville. Okay. And Nashville has these cool like steam tunnels and stuff. And I don't know. I've just been doing research on like mill buildings and things like that. And they have a lot of those where I am too. But it has been fun to do some research on songwriting in Nashville and that sort of historical stuff. So now and then I research things.
I will say one of the nice things of coming from a pure high fantasy background where I had to build the entire world and all of it was created by me and my brain, and then doing like something set in our world is that like the research feels like it's so much easier because it feels like most of like the world's already created. It exists. I just have to figure it out. So much nicer.
I've written 2 high fantasy series where it is set in a separate world. And the first one is a journey series too. So every book they go to a different country. And let me tell you, every country has to feel completely different than the other ones. Language, hair, dress, customs. You have to make, and you always have to give one unique thing for each one. And I have a friend, Dana Peterfreund, who is also an author, and we have this thing where we talk about how to like make people like geniuses. And it's actually not making them smart about the thing that they know. It's actually making them complain about one thing they really hate in their research. And it's that same sort of thing when you're building worlds. You can give them like one really, really, really minute, crazy thing that makes the reader think bigger about what the world is going to be, and that can help.
Yeah, no world building is complete without prejudices, right?
Correct. There's lots of prejudice. And religion. And sex.
The 3 main things.
There you go. And I'm willing to bet we have some writers in the audience. So what would be your best advice to someone out there working on their manuscript, especially Romantasy?
Okay, I will go first. My favorite piece of advice is sort of a spinoff of don't compare your first draft to a published manuscript. But I like to say that when you're writing, your taste and your talent aren't on a linear line. They're not together. They're actually on a circle. So what you enjoy reading is almost never where your talent is. And so as you get better at your writing, what also happens is that your talent gets better, but your taste gets better at the same time. So you're always trying to fight your circle, and you just need to like let yourself write the thing, even if it's bad, because you can always fix it, but you still have to get the book done.
So I guess I would just say, okay, so if you're writing Romantasy, okay, there's been so much done in romance and in fantasy, and sometimes it can feel kind of overwhelming, like, oh, that's already been done, but it hasn't been done from your perspective or in your voice. So just let yourself do it. And you do need to put your own twist on certain things if they've been done a lot. Just try to find a new angle, or a new way of saying it. But yeah, don't get so bogged down and discouraged, and like it's easy to see what other people are doing and be like, man, I was going to do that in my book. It's okay. Go ahead and do it. It'll feel completely different once it's out there on paper. And and you can always tweak it, change it, put your own angle on it. I tend to, when I'm doing retellings, I like to gender bend characters. Like I did a retelling of the Nutcracker that was like Faye, and like I gender bent the Sugar Plum Fairy, and he is my most popular character. He's this sassy pink-haired guy, and he's awesome. And it's fun. So just think about, can I flip this around? How would it feel if I change this part up? And then you've got a whole new thing all of a sudden, and it kind of unlocks what you were trying to do. So,
yeah, I always think of that cartoon where the baker comes in and they have this like little cake and they put it on the table next to this like massive like tiered cake, and they're like, oh God, there's a better cake. And then the customer comes in and goes, oh hell yeah, 2 cakes. Like that's what readers aren't going to care that it's too similar. You get 2 cakes. Like people love things that are similar to things that they love. So if you've written something that seems like it's been done before, like, there's your comp title. Like that's not a bad thing.
That's why their tropes are so popular.
That's why tropes become tropes. Exactly. But one piece of writing advice that I try to live by is keep moving forward, which was originally a Walt Disney quote, and we'll just pretend that didn't happen. But it's important to not get like stuck in your cycle of like, you just get in a scene that you can't make work, and so you spend like months and months and months trying to get the scene to work, or like you just at any point in this process, you can get stuck in trying to make something work or trying to get forward. And it's important to just like take a breath and like keep progressing forward, because you can get stuck on so many other things, but it's okay. You got this. Take a breath. Keep moving forward, and you'll have 2 cakes.
You'll have 2 cakes. As a follow-up to that, before we become authors, we have an idea about what it will be like, but the reality is always different. What has surprised you the most on your author journey?
I don't know. There's a lot of surprises. I actually think the best part is the community, especially your fellow authors. Like, especially in romance, it's almost predominantly all women, and there aren't very many genres, let alone like full industries of just powerful, badass women. And we have one. And they're all so, almost everyone is like always willing to reach out and give a helping hand and help you fix something or plot with you or promote you. And no, everyone is not expecting anything from you. And I think that's really, really powerful, especially so many people come from like corporate settings where everything is cutthroat, and this is cutthroat in that we all want a career doing it, but I feel like we're all lifting each other's boats doing it.
I always have to remember how to turn this thing on. So I think what has surprised me, I started out on the indie side, if you can already tell. I have books now with Source Books Casablanca, but so starting with self-publishing all the books, I was surprised by, I don't know, social media and how much it impacted my success once I got on TikTok. That was amazing. But also how much time it can take up if I'm not careful. And I do enjoy it in a way. Again, ADHD thing, I think, is like when I get bored of writing, I switch over. Yes. So I have to be careful that it doesn't become this thing where, and yes, it does affect my sales, but it has to not steal from the writing time. So I guess finding a balance with everything, and also finding a balance, like, as I have become a little bit more successful, like just, how much of myself to make available, So if you're thinking about that sort of thing, it's important to like just have some boundaries in place and love the community, but then also just like protect yourself and, your mental health and your creative space.
Yeah. So Christmas is my 11th book. And the thing that surprised me the most is that it doesn't really get easier, this job. Like I'm up here like shaking because of like the imposter syndrome and just being in front of people. And I've been doing this for like 10 plus years. Like, why? Just like chill out. Oh my God. But yeah, it's like, there's the parts of it that are still like, man, it just keeps the gift that keeps on giving. It's good. It's good. And then we get to like actually like talk to people and the readers are amazing. So there's balances for sure.
Well, here's a fun one. Best moment since becoming an author.
Okay, so this is just a fangirl thing. Okay, I And I don't care what you think about Fourth Wing. I loved it. And I got to be on a panel with Rebecca Yaros at a Polycon. And that was really freaking awesome to sit down at the table from her. So yeah, that was probably one of my coolest moments. I have had a ton of awesome reader moments. Ooh, I just had one. Okay, an artist just made, it's Gabriella, I forget the last name, but I reposted it on my Instagram. Just made the most brilliant fan art from my Peter Pan retelling, like the fairy revel in that. And like, it's amazing fan art. Just to get like fan art is just, it feels like that I didn't commission. And I have a problem. I commission so much art. Like I love character art. But just to see that was like, what? Like that was awesome.
Yeah, fan art is like a thing beyond. Like every time it's like, oh, you made this for me. You made this up of my people. Thank you.
Even when they just take your like pictures with your books and they're really pretty.
Right?
They spent time.
Yeah. Some of the Instagram photos were like, holy crap, that's amazing. Yeah.
I could never.
I know. I think the one thing that always pops out for me for in my career was the first time I got sent on tour by the publisher. That was like, I remember sitting in my car and just like crying when I got the news. You're gonna pay me to go places? You're gonna send me to hotels and get to talk to readers? Because then like, yeah, you get to like see readers and like be around people because this is such a solitary job. You're sitting in your office or like on your computer and like you don't really talk to people except on social media. So to get to like come out and like see human beings is always amazing.
Yeah, I have so many. I actually have 50 books written over the last 12 years. So I published my first book in July of 2012, and I had the numbers to hit New York Times in 2013, and they changed the list, so I didn't make it. And that was really sad. And then this year, I hit the New York Times, yes, for the first time. Thank you. Almost a decade since the time, or over a decade since the time I thought that I was going to be on the list. And we all went to Book Bonanza right after. And so I got to be with all of my friends. And it was amazing. It was amazing.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. And I'm wondering, is there a question that nobody ever asked and you just wish they would because you have a really cool answer for it?
No. Okay. That's too much pressure.
Okay, so if there was one piece of advice you wish you'd known before getting into this business, what would it be?
Mine was the advice that I was given. So I actually published the first time because Colleen Hoover told me to, which is like a weird story. But it's an awesome story. But yeah, no, I was published. I was just publishing on like Fiction Press, which was like sort of the precursor to Wattpad. And the book sort of took off on that site, and a friend of hers read it, and she emailed me because she said I was losing a lot of money, and she was right. Yeah, and her advice was not to read the reviews because the reviews are for readers, which has held true, especially because a lot of us are in our feels, because it's like we just produced this baby and then people would come on there and trash it, which is their right to do so if they did not like it. But I don't need to go into their space and see that.
So something that I wish I had known. I mean, I guess just how much persistence is required. If you want to do this, it's just keep going. You have to keep going and you have to keep constantly producing. And also, staying out of reader spaces for your own mental health is very important because, everybody has the right to feel the way they feel about your work. I did not always stay out of those spaces at the beginning. And there would be reviews that would like send me into a spiral. Like, I'm awful. I can, you just have to like just shut that out because for every person that didn't like it, there are people who are like, I read this at just the right time when I needed it. And, this about these themes of grief, and the grieving process really helped me or something like that, or I just was laughing and kicking my feet through your whole book. And that's what I needed, was to laugh at that time, so stick with the good, like focus on the good and just kind of let the rest go and your people will find you.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to be your own advocate a lot, because again, it's a very solitary job. Like you have like an agent and like people you work with, but at the end of the day, you are your brand and you are your own boss and you are like all the employees in your company. So you have to be the one to also say, like, to draw your own boundaries and to be like, all right, you are done being on Instagram for today. And like, we're just going to stop it. And you have to know like what to do to protect yourself, to protect your psyche and your mental state. Even if it means being kind of harsh with yourself. Yeah, it requires a lot of like self-actualization, which I don't think people realize that it's part of this industry, is that you have to be very aware of yourself and what works for you and how you can function so you can survive in this job, because it can eat you up.
Yeah, especially if you consider that the majority of your job, you are in complete isolation. So when everybody was doing this during COVID, I was like, oh, what's the difference? And I was like, we don't leave the house and we sit in front of a computer for 8 hours alone. Everyone's suffering and we're like, oops. You have to, it's really hard for people, especially who people go from writing when they have a job to writing full-time. A lot of people really struggle because the actual going out into the world part inspires you to keep writing. And then when you don't have that part and you just have to sit in front of a computer and still do it every day, it's harder.
And being like keeping yourself like on task and on like deadline too. That's a huge thing. That's a huge skill to have, to be able to keep yourself accountable. Oh my God. Like, I don't think people realize how hard that is sometimes to like, it's really hard to like, okay, you set all the calendar events, you set like all the timers and like you bribe yourself and it's just whatever.
So much bribing.
So much bribing.
Yeah. The whole self-motivation thing. And just like for me, since I do tend to be kind of distractible, I usually have like a ritual that I do every morning. Like I drink the same thing. I eat the same. It sounds weird probably, but I follow the same pattern every morning, and sometimes I'll have a playlist for each book and I'll listen to certain songs like as I'm starting to get into the zone, and it just helps me kind of, so find what works for you and like just stick with it. Really is. It like puts me in because otherwise I'll be like everywhere and I have
they
to
do
follow
that for
the same
babies,
thing.
you know.
Thanks for that. Yes.
We talked over, sorry.
Thank you, guys.
And we could keep going.
We can keep going.
If you have questions, ask us at the table.
Yes, ask at the table.
Thank you so much.
Let's give a round of applause to our authors.